Have you ever felt so lost that you thought nothing could save you? I thought nothing could save me, until the day my son did something simple, and my life changed forever. I remember the night it all began. I was sitting alone in the living room, the dim light from the lamp barely illuminating the room, a framed photo of my son on the table. I held on to that photo as if it were my last anchor, the only piece of life still connecting me to the world. Outside, the distant sound of a passing car made me shiver, as if the roar of explosions still echoed in my mind. It had been like this almost every night since I returned from the war. Perhaps you've felt something similar, that sensation of being physically present but with your mind still trapped elsewhere. The war left invisible scars on me, marks no one could see, but which hurt more than any physical wound. I would wake up sweaty, my heart racing, reliving every moment on the battlefield. The sounds of everyday life became triggers, and the silence inside my house seemed to scream louder than any siren. Have you ever experienced this? The feeling of looking at the people you love and realizing you're there, but not truly living? That's how I felt for months, distant, closed off, unable to explain to my family the weight I carried. My son was too young to understand, but even without understanding, he felt it. Children have this gift of sensing when something is wrong. He watched me from afar, with those curious yet worried eyes as if trying to find a way to reach me, and it was on one of those days that something unexpected happened. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because it was something simple, almost banal, that began to change everything. I remember sitting with my head down, breathing deeply to hold back the tears, when I felt a small hand land on my shoulder. It was him. Without saying a word, he just hugged me. It wasn't just any hug. It was a long, silent hug that seemed to say, "I'm here, Dad." And in that moment, something inside me broke, but in a good way. It was as if the barrier I'd built myself began to give way. Stay with me until the end, because that was the moment that turned my life upside down. Suddenly, everything around me felt different. The air felt lighter, and for the first time in months, I felt like there might be a way out, a way to truly live again. That innocent gesture was the spark that ignited something inside me. I began to wonder if there was still hope, if there was still a chance to start over, to be the father and man my son deserved. And it's precisely here that my story begins to take a new direction, a path I never imagined I would take, and one that would take me to places I never dreamed of, including within myself. But before I tell you how everything changed, you need to understand what happened in the days that followed that embrace. That's when the transformation began to take shape, step by step, in a way that still moves me, just remembering it. In the days following that hug, something began to shift inside me. It was as if each morning was a new chance to take a deep breath and try again. Little things I hadn't even noticed before began to take on meaning. The sound of my son's laughter, the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen, even the street noise that had previously frightened me now seemed to remind me that I was alive. And it's at this point in my story that I want to open up space for you too. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. Perhaps you've been through something similar, or know someone who has. Sharing your experience can inspire others who need to hear that they are not alone on this journey. And if this story resonates with you, please take the opportunity to like the video. It shows me that this content is truly helping you, and encourages me to continue bringing you stories that inspire reflection and hope. Your participation is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who also need a word of comfort. If you're not already subscribed, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. This way you'll stay up to date with each new video and continue following this journey with me. I say this because what comes next is even more profound. In the next few moments, you'll see how that small gesture became a turning point in my life. Something that made me face my fears in ways I never imagined. When I returned from the war, it wasn't like the movies where the hero steps off the plane, hugs his family, and moves on as if nothing had happened. The truth is, my war didn't end when the last shot was fired. My body was back in the United States, but my mind was still there, in that scorching desert, where every sound was a threat and every movement needed to be calculated to survive. The first few nights home were the hardest. I would wake up sweaty, with my heart racing, and it took me a while to realize I was no longer on the battlefield. The distant sound of fireworks, which should have been a cause for celebration, made me instinctively dive to the ground, as if I were still under attack. My neighbors might never know that behind my door there was a soldier trying to learn to live again. The strangest thing was the silence. After months of hearing helicopters, gunshots, and screams, the silence in my house seemed unbearable. It was as if it reminded me of everything I'd lost. I'd sit on the porch and gaze at the American flag waving in front of the house, feeling a mixture of pride and pain. It was a symbol of the freedom I helped defend, but also a reminder of the nights I spent away from my son, the holidays I missed, and the conversations I never had with my wife, because I was thousands of miles away. Maybe you understand what it's like to come home and realize you're not the same person you left. War changes us in ways no one teaches us how to deal with. I had trouble smiling. People would say, "Welcome back," and I'd nod in return. But inside, I felt like an outsider. Family gatherings were a challenge. Everyone wanted to hear stories, but I didn't want to tell them. Not because I didn't trust them, but because putting into words what I saw and felt seemed impossible. And to be honest, I was afraid of scaring the ones I loved. I withdrew into myself, creating a barrier that even I didn't know how to break. Civilian life required simple decisions, but my mind was trained to think like a soldier. I'd walk into restaurants and check the exits, watching every person who passed by on the street, as if I were always on high alert. This isn't just a habit, it's a mindset that takes time to change. Insomnia became my companion. At night, lying in bed, I would stare at the ceiling and wait for sleep to arrive, but it rarely came. When it did, it brought nightmares. I relived ambushes, heard the voices of my fallen comrades, smelled the gunpowder. I would get up and go to the kitchen, drink a glass of water and stare into the darkness outside. The night seemed endless. I knew I needed help, but at the same time I was ashamed to admit it. In our culture, especially among the military, there is an expectation of unwavering strength. Asking for help felt like weakness, and I didn't want my son to see me as fragile. It was at this point that I began to realize the impact all of this was having on my family. My wife paced the house silently, trying not to overwhelm me, but I could see the concern in her eyes. My son, even at a young age, stopped asking questions about the war, as if he realized it was a painful subject, and it tore me apart. I wanted to be a present father, but my mind was always miles away. People talk a lot about the visible scars of war, but the invisible ones are the ones no one sees, and the ones we carry alone. It's like you're trapped on a battlefield inside your own head, trying to find a way out. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this was the point where I began to question whether there was a way out, whether it was possible to start over. I needed to understand what was happening to me. I needed to decipher the hidden truth behind my pain. And this journey of self-discovery was one of the most difficult I've ever faced. It was as if I were behind the scenes of my own life, observing everything from the outside, unsure how to become a part of it again. Every decision felt like a burden, every conversation an effort, but at the same time, there was a small voice inside me telling me it wasn't the end yet. That voice grew stronger when I saw my son playing in the yard, running barefoot on the grass, laughing out loud as if the world were a safe place. It reminded me that I wanted to be present, to feel part of that home again. That's when my journey of transformation began, one step at a time, even without knowing exactly where it would lead. And it's about this process that I want to continue telling you, because it might resonate with you too, even if your struggle is different from mine. Write in the comments, "I understand this struggle." I want to know who else feels like they're on this quest to truly live again. Returning to civilian life was like learning to walk again, but with heavy legs, as if each step were taken with a backpack full of memories I couldn't let go of. Breakfast, once a simple and even joyful moment, became a silent ritual. I sat at the table, my wife across from me, my son trying to make conversation, and it felt like an invisible wall between us. Every noise from the street made me turn my head. When a truck passed by making that screeching sound, my body reacted before my mind even understood what was happening, and I stayed there, trying to hide it, so no one would notice my heart was racing. The people around me expected me to be happy to be back, and I wanted to be. But what no one saw was the backstage of my mind. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the man reflected there. I was no longer the same husband, the same father, the same friend. The soldier who'd returned from war seemed to have lost the manual for how to be a civilian again. There was a heaviness in the air, an unease that lingered in every conversation, and the more I tried to act normal, the more I felt like an imposter. It was as if the war had left an invisible lens before my eyes, distorting everything around me. The sound of a door slamming could be the trigger for a memory I was trying to bury. I was at a family Thanksgiving dinner surrounded by people who loved me, and suddenly the pop of a champagne cork made me freeze. I wasn't in the dining room anymore. I was back in the desert amidst the chaos, hearing explosions. My palms were sweating and I needed to go outside to breathe. How do you explain this to someone? How do you tell your family that even a celebration can take you back to the worst day of your life? It was at this point that I realized the magnitude of the challenge. The war wasn't behind me. It had changed the way I saw the world. The nights were the worst. Lying in bed, I heard every noise in the house, every creak in the floorboards, every car passing by on the street. My eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, waiting for something to happen. When I finally fell asleep, vivid dreams came, almost as if they were new missions. I would wake up sweaty, breathing heavily, and sometimes it would take me a few minutes to realize I was in my room, safe. My wife would sometimes wake up with her and put her hand on my shoulder, but I would pull away, not for lack of love, but because my body was still in alert mode. It was as if I needed to relearn how to accept affection, relearn how to relax. And there was silence. Not the normal silence of a house at night, but that heavy silence that seems to have a sound. I would sit in the living room after everyone had gone to sleep and stare at the shadows on the floor. My mind would replay stories I didn't want to relive. I remembered the companions who didn't return, the promises I couldn't keep, the split-second decisions I'd had to make that still haunted me. I wondered if I deserved to be there, if I'd really done enough to return home. It's hard to explain to someone who's never experienced it, but it was as if there was a hidden truth reminding me that I owed a debt. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it was during this period that I began to realize that if I didn't find a way to change my mindset, I could lose everything that mattered most. It wasn't just about overcoming my fear of noise or learning to sleep through the night. It was about regaining my ability to feel, to connect with people, to live without having to hide behind a straight face. It was a journey of painful discoveries, of confronting memories I'd rather avoid, but also of revelations that changed the way I saw life. I realized that every little moment had a greater impact than I imagined. A dinner with my son, an afternoon in the backyard, even a simple, unhurried, "Good morning." These moments were like anchors pulling me back to the present. They reminded me that I still had a choice, that I could decide whether to remain a prisoner of memories or to take a step, however small, toward healing. And that was the beginning of something I didn't know I needed, an internal transformation that only began because I had the courage to face what was hurting. Write in the comments, I want that strength too. I want to feel who is with me on this journey of returning to life fully, even carrying the scars no one sees. There came a point where the pain seemed more than I could bear. Mornings began heavy, and the simple act of getting out of bed felt like a battle I was already losing. The world outside kept spinning, neighbors going to work, children catching the school bus, flags waving from porches, also normal, and I stood there feeling completely out of place. It wasn't just sadness. It was a feeling of being trapped inside a body that no longer responded as it once had. I wondered if I would ever be the man my family needed me to be again. The silence at the breakfast table was almost deafening, and sometimes I would leave the house before everyone woke up just to avoid facing those eyes filled with questions I didn't have the courage to answer. The nights, already long, began to feel endless. I would walk around the house in the early hours, peering into the closed rooms, listening to my son's quiet breathing as he slept, and wondering how something so pure and so small could exist in a world that felt so heavy to me. This was the part that hurt the most, realizing that the war hadn't just taken me away, but also here, in the home I'd fought so hard to protect. It was as if all joy had been ripped from me, and I would look at the toys scattered around the living room, the drawings stuck to the refrigerator, and feel like a stranger in my own story. It was during this period that dangerous thoughts began to creep in. I won't romanticize this, because there's nothing pretty about feeling hopeless. I found myself sitting in the garage one night, alone, my head full of memories, feeling the weight of every decision I made on the battlefield. The hidden truth no one tells you is that soldiers break down too, and when it happens away from the spotlight, it's much quieter. I wondered if my absence wouldn't make it easier on everyone, if I wasn't being a burden. It was a fleeting thought, but it frightened me deeply. That was the lowest point of my journey. It was like being in a deep hole, where the light barely penetrates, and the only thing you can hear is the echo of your own pain. I tried to distract myself by watching TV and reading newspapers, but everything seemed to remind me of what I had lost. News of conflicts in other countries made my chest tighten. as if I were still there. And when Sunday came, seeing families gathered at the neighborhood church singing and smiling made me feel even more distant. I wanted to believe there was a way back, but the road seemed invisible. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because this is where something I didn't expect began. It was in this state of complete darkness that a simple gesture began to open a ray of light. It was as if life was giving me one last invitation to choose to continue. It wasn't a grand revelation with background music and applause, but a silent, almost imperceptible moment that began to shake my mindset. And it was at this point that everything inside me began to slowly reorganize itself, as if a new journey were being drawn from my most fragile point. Write in the comments, "I've felt this weight." I want to see who else understands what it's like to face your own silence and still decide to keep walking. It was a Saturday afternoon when it all happened. The sky was gray, the kind of day that only reinforces that heavy feeling we carry inside. I sat in the living room motionless, with the TV on mute, as if the noise were too much for me. My thoughts were far away, immersed in that dark place where I kept remembering every decision I had to make on the battlefield. I wondered if I would ever be able to feel anything different from that. It was then that my son came running in, carrying a colorful sheet of paper. He didn't say anything special, just handed me the drawing and watched me with that curious look as if waiting for my reaction. The drawing was simple: a large sun, a house, and 3 people holding hands. It took me a few seconds to realize that those 3 people were us. There was something in that childlike line that hit me like a punch in the chest, not with pain, but with something I hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. In that instant, I realized that in his eyes I was still part of that house, that family. It was as if he'd pulled me back to the surface without even knowing it. It was a silent revelation, but one that had a profound impact. My first reaction was to simply hold that paper tightly. I didn't cry in front of him, but I felt the tears burning inside. He smiled and hugged me, as if he knew he'd done something important, even without understanding the depth of the moment. It wasn't a quick hug. He just stood there glued to me, and that silence was unlike any other I'd experienced. It was a healing silence, one that said, "Dad, you're still here, and I need you." It was at that moment that something began to shift inside me. I spent the rest of the day with that paper in my hand. I placed the drawing on the refrigerator door, right in the center, so I could see it every time I walked into the kitchen. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a reminder that I still had reasons to fight, that my journey wasn't over. That was the first spark that ignited something that had been nearly extinguished inside me. For the first time in months, I felt like there might be a way back, a chance to rebuild myself. That night, as I sat on the porch to reflect, I realized that that small gesture had done more than any encouraging words could. It wasn't a motivational speech, it wasn't profound advice, it was just an act of pure and simple love. And that's why I say that sometimes transformation begins behind the scenes, in details that almost go unnoticed. It's these small revelations that have the power to change everything, because they remind us of who we are and what truly matters. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this was just the first step. After that day, I began making different decisions, small changes that led me to a healing process I never imagined possible. It wasn't easy, but it was real, and every choice I made from then on had a direct impact on my life and the lives of my family. Write in the comments, "That hug spoke to me." I want to see who else has felt the power of a simple gesture to completely change the course of an entire day. That night was unlike any other. I sat in the living room, holding my son's drawing as if it were a piece of life someone had just given me back. It was a simple piece of paper, but it seemed to carry a greater message, a silent invitation to be part of my own story again. For the first time in a long time, I felt something resembling hope. My heart was still heavy, the memories of the war still lingered, but a small ray of light shone through the darkness. And that light was enough to make me wonder, is it still possible to start over? Is there still a path to being the father my son sees in that drawing? I stared at that yellow sun he'd drawn, so large, taking up almost half the page, and thought about how for him the world was still bright, still full of color. It was as if he were telling me that I could see the world that way again too. This idea touched me in a way I hadn't expected. I wondered if perhaps somewhere inside me there still existed that man who laughed out loud, who made plans, who dreamed of the future. Maybe I could once again be someone my son could be proud of. Maybe he could still see me as a hero. And maybe I could start to see myself that way too. The next morning, I found myself smiling to myself when I saw my son eating cereal at the table. It was a shy smile, almost foreign to me, but it was real, small, but genuine. And in that instant, I realized something had changed. His gesture had broken the cold routine I'd been living in. It wasn't as if all my problems had suddenly disappeared, but as if someone had given me permission to try again. It was a shift in mindset, and I knew that from then on, every little decision would matter. In the days that followed, I began doing simple things I'd avoided for months. I went for a walk around the block even though my body was still tense. I sat in the backyard and watched my son play, feeling the wind on my face as if for the first time. Even the smell of freshly cut grass, so common in American suburbs, seemed to bring me back to the present. I realized that I was, little by little, moving from being a spectator in my life to becoming a participant in it again. This process brought me deep reflections. I thought a lot about what it means to be a father in a culture that so values strength and independence. I realized that perhaps the greatest demonstration of strength is not hiding pain, but finding the courage to face it. My son, without saying a word, showed me that he only needed me to be present, whole, not perfect. It was as if he were teaching me a hidden truth, that healing would not come from trying to erase the past but from learning to live despite it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this was the point where my journey began to take a new direction. It was the beginning of a silent transformation, a series of small choices that made me realize I still had value, that I could still offer something to the world. Every hug, every smile exchanged, every moment of vulnerability became a building block in the reconstruction of my life. And this was the first time I felt that the war might have wounded me, but it hadn't defeated me. Write in the comments, I want this light too. I want to hear who else is ready to make room for hope to enter, even if it's just a crack in the darkness. From that day on, something inside me began to move, as if someone had finally unlocked a door that had been stuck for months. It wasn't an instant miracle. It wasn't like waking up the next day and finding everything resolved. In fact, it felt more like the first step in a long marathon, the one that hurts, but must be taken for any change to happen. I remember waking up that morning with a strange feeling, as if the air had lightened a little. My son's drawing was still on the refrigerator door, and as I walked past it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a desire to try. It was that day that I made a decision I'd been putting off for weeks, maybe months. I picked up the phone and called my local veteran support center. The operator's voice on the other end was calm, almost welcoming, and she gave me an appointment for the following week. I hung up the phone with sweating palms, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. Fear of finally facing everything I'd been holding inside, but relief at having taken a real step towards something that could change my life. When the day of the appointment arrived, the drive there seemed longer than it actually was. Driving through those familiar streets brought back memories of times gone by, of when I was walking home from work, before everything changed. As I arrived at the building, I saw the American flag flying right at the entrance. It waved gently, as if reminding me of why I'd gone to war. I entered the building and felt the weight of every photo on the walls, images of soldiers, medals, battle portraits. It made me feel proud, but also pained. It was as if every face there reminded me of someone who never returned. The therapist greeted me with a kind smile. I sat in the chair, a little uncomfortable, and for a few minutes I couldn't say anything. The silence felt heavy, but she didn't rush me. When I finally found the courage to open my mouth, the words came out in a rush, as if stuck in my throat. I talked about the sleepless nights, the noise that made me jump, the fear of losing control. I talked about the friends I left behind, about the guilt I felt for being alive when they weren't. She just listened, and that was exactly what I needed. I left that first session exhausted, but with the strange feeling that something had begun to reorganize itself within me. But therapy was just the beginning. A friend, also a veteran, invited me to a support group in the neighboring neighborhood. I didn't want to go. The idea of sitting in a room full of strangers and talking about my feelings seemed unbearable, but something inside me told me I had to try. At the first meeting, I sat silently most of the time, just listening. I heard stories from men and women who had been through similar or even worse things than me. Some spoke with anger, others with sadness, and some simply cried. I realized it was a safe space, where no one had to pretend they were okay. And for the first time, I felt I wasn't alone. These meetings became part of my routine. It wasn't easy leaving the house every week to face them, but I began to look forward to these moments. It was as if with each meeting, I was able to release some of the weight I was carrying. And something curious happened. The more I spoke, the lighter I felt. I discovered that my words had an impact on others too, that my pain could be a point of connection. This was an important revelation, realizing that my healing journey could help others on the same path. In the midst of this process, I began making small changes to my daily routine. The first was to start running again early in the morning. I put on my sneakers, went to the park, and started slowly. The sound of my footsteps on the asphalt and the cold wind on my face gave me a sense of life I hadn't felt in a long time. I also started cooking for my family on Friday nights, something I loved doing before the war. Each dish I prepared was like another brick in rebuilding our routine. Moments of prayer also became part of my day. They weren't long, rehearsed prayers, but sincere conversations. I would sit on the porch, look up at the sky, and simply speak. I would ask for strength. I would give thanks for the small victories, and sometimes I would just remain silent. I discovered that this habit helped me organize my thoughts, find clarity amidst the confusion, and little by little, my body began to respond. My anxiety attacks became less frequent, my nights became a little more peaceful, and my son's smile became my thermometer. When he genuinely laughed, I knew I was on the right path. Of course, not every day was good. There were setbacks, days when it felt like everything was back to square one, but now I had tools to cope. When darkness came, I remembered the drawing on the fridge, the stories I'd heard in the group, and the therapist's words that the healing process isn't a straight line, but a path full of ups and downs. I was learning to be patient with myself, to accept that even the bad days had something to teach me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because it was during this phase that I began to realize that my recovery was transforming not only me, but also the entire dynamics of my family. It was as if every step I took directly influenced the atmosphere in the house. The silence at the dinner table gave way to shy conversations, then laughter, until one day I realized we were once again dining as a real family. This impact was too powerful to ignore, and it made me understand that my decisions, no matter how small, were creating a new path for my son's future. Write in the comments. I also decided to start. I want to see who is willing to take the first step on this journey of transformation, even if it seems difficult at first. It was at this point in my journey that I began to feel like I was truly living again. It wasn't just about surviving the day anymore. It was about finding small moments of joy that reminded me I was still part of that world. The first time I truly laughed was almost strange. We were in the backyard, my son throwing a ball to me as if it were the most important day of his life. I caught the ball back and, without realizing it, began to laugh in a way I hadn't in months. It was a free, almost liberating laugh, as if in that instant my body had understood that it was okay to feel again. My wife looked at me through the kitchen window and smiled, a smile that said more than any words. There, for the first time, I felt like I was recovering something I thought I'd lost forever. The days began to take on new colors. It wasn't an explosive change. It was subtle, but noticeable. Waking up in the morning no longer felt like such a burden. I started taking my son to school, something I'd previously avoided because I was afraid of running into acquaintances and having to answer questions. Now, every walk to school was an opportunity to talk to him about simple things. What he'd dreamed about the night before, what his favorite cartoon of the week was, what game he wanted to play this weekend. These moments became fuel for my transformation process. Over the weekend, I decided to take my family to the city park, the one with the pond where the ducks wait for breadcrumbs. It was a place we used to go before the war, but I hadn't had the courage to return since arriving. Walking through that place was like facing a ghost. But to my surprise, the feeling wasn't of pain but of reunion. Seeing my son running in the grass, laughing, and throwing pebbles into the water brought me a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I sat on the bench, took a deep breath, and realized I was experiencing something that had previously seemed impossible, a moment of tranquility. Gradually, I also returned to activities that reminded me of who I was. I started playing the guitar again on Sunday nights, a tradition I'd had before being drafted. At first, my hands trembled, but soon the notes began to flow, and my house was once again filled with music. My son would sit next to me and drum his hands on the couch as if he were part of an improvised band. These moments were small, but they had a huge impact. It was as if each sound of a string played was a piece of the puzzle I was putting together inside myself. I also started cooking again, and it became a gathering point for my family. Preparing Friday dinner became a ritual. We'd put on music on the radio, My son would help mix the seasonings, and my wife would chop the vegetables. Those nights had something special. It wasn't just about food. It was about belonging, about celebrating the simple act of being together. I noticed my house was filling with good sounds, laughter, clanging silverware, mingling voices. It was as if the heavy silence that had previously reigned had been replaced by life. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it was at this stage that I understood that reconnecting with life wasn't just about happy moments. It was also about accepting that there would still be difficult days, but that those days didn't have to define my entire path. I began to realize that every smile, every hug, every step outside my home was an act of resistance against everything the war tried to steal from me. And it was this mindset that kept me going, even when the memories insisted on coming back. Write in the comments. I want to experience this too. I want to hear from those who are ready to reconnect with what truly matters, even if it's slowly, one day at a time. When I look back and reflect on everything I've experienced, what strikes me most is how the turning point in my life began so simply. It wasn't a grand event, it wasn't a movie speech, it wasn't someone tapping me on the shoulder and telling me everything was going to be okay. It was a small gesture, so small it might have gone unnoticed if I'd been too immersed in my own grief. A child's drawing, a silent hug, a smile full of confidence. It was then that I understood something powerful. Sometimes what changes our story isn't a clap of thunder, but a whisper. And if we pay attention, that whisper is enough to light a flame. Hope didn't come to me loudly. It entered slowly, almost quietly, like someone who doesn't want to disturb. It arrived at the most unlikely moment, when I was almost convinced there was no way out. And that's precisely what made it so transformative. I realized I didn't need to have everything figured out to take the next step. I didn't need to be the perfect man, the perfect father, the veteran who came back completely healed. I just needed to be willing to try again. And that's what I did. I began to see my life as a kind of construction site. Every small gesture became a brick in the path to rebuilding everything I thought I'd lost. Every morning I got out of bed was a victory. Every conversation I had with my son was an opportunity to be more present. Every smile from my wife was confirmation that I was on the right path. The hidden truth I discovered is that transformation rarely happens all at once. It's made up of daily, silent choices that gradually change the course of everything. It was in this process that I realized that the war had tried to teach me to be tough, to shut down my emotions to survive. But now I could choose something different. I could decide to feel again. And when I began to allow myself to feel, life regained texture, smell, and sound. The colors became more vivid. The laughter began to sound louder. Even the small noises in the house, the creaking of the floorboards, the sound of the microwave, began to remind me that I was safe. This realization was like someone had opened the curtains after months of darkness. I also learned that I wasn't alone. Often we think we're the only ones going through something, that no one else would understand. But when I started sharing my story in support groups, I realized there were others like me. Men and women who also carried internal battles, who also had sleepless nights, who also wondered if there was still a way back. And each story I heard became fuel to keep going. It was as if the scars on each of us formed a kind of collective map, showing that it was possible to get through the pain and come out the other side. This journey taught me that courage isn't about not feeling fear. Courage is about feeling fear and still deciding to move forward. Every time I left home to face the world, I was telling myself that the past wouldn't define me. Every time I hugged my son and said, "I love you," I was breaking the cycle of silence that had nearly swallowed me. Every small decision had an impact beyond me. It shaped how my son saw the world, how he would learn to navigate his own challenges in the future. Behind the scenes of this transformation, there were difficult days, and there still are. I won't romanticize the process. There are memories that still hurt. There are nights when sleep won't come. There are sounds that still keep me alert. But the difference is that now I know these moments aren't the end of the line. They're just part of the journey. I've learned to breathe deeply, to remember the embrace that brought me back, to anchor myself in the present. This learning has given me the strength to keep walking, even when the ground seems shaky. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the greatest gift this journey has given me is a new understanding of what it means to live. Living isn't about waiting for everything to be perfect to be happy. Living is about finding meaning even in the midst of chaos, about being able to see beauty in the small things, about deciding that pain won't have the last word. And when you understand this, You begin to see hope in places that once seemed completely dark. If I could sum up everything I've learned in one sentence, it would be this: simple gestures can save lives. A smile can be what keeps someone from giving up. A hug can be what breathes life back into someone drowning in memories. A word spoken at the right moment can be what rekindles the flame of hope. And if you have the chance to be that person for someone, don't waste it. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to fix everything. Sometimes it's enough to just be there, to be present, to be the light in the moment when darkness seems to be winning. That's what I try to live now, every day. Choosing to be present, choosing to be hopeful, choosing to be the kind of father my son will remember not just as a survivor, but as someone who chose to carry on. This choice changed not only my life, but also the atmosphere in my home. Conversations returned, laughter became more frequent, and the silence is now a silence of peace, not distance. It's a reminder that no matter how deep the pit, there is always a ladder, even if sometimes it's built step by step, with one's own hands. Write in the comments, "I choose to be light." I want to hear from those who are willing to bring hope into their own lives and into the lives of those who need it most. Looking back at everything I've shared so far, I realize this isn't just my story. It's also an invitation for those listening to reflect on their own journey. Everyone carries struggles that aren't always visible. Everyone has moments when they feel at their limit. And perhaps, as happened to me, a simple gesture is enough to begin a transformation that changes everything. That's why I believe stories like this need to be told. They're not just tales of overcoming. They're reminders that no one needs to face darkness alone. Sometimes what saves someone is knowing there's someone else who understands, who's been there, who's found a way. And this is where you enter this conversation. If this story touched you in any way, if at any point you identified with what I felt, I invite you to share that feeling. When you comment, you not only show me that this message reached your heart, but you also give others the chance to read it and feel less alone. This space here is more than a video. It's a community where we can talk about our pain, our victories, and our hopes without fear of judgment. Like this video, if it resonated with you. Each like is like turning on a light that helps this message reach others who need to hear that there's still a way out, that there's still a path back to life. This simple act has a huge impact and helps more people discover they're not alone in their struggle. And if you want to continue following inspiring stories that bring reflection and hope, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next chapters of this journey and will continue walking with me. I believe that together we can create a safe space to talk about these truths that are often hidden behind the scenes of our daily lives. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what comes after this decision to continue is even more revealing. I want to show you how these small steps transformed into something much bigger, something that changed not only my life, but also the lives of those around me. Write in the comments, "This gesture inspired me." I want to hear from those who are ready to transform their own story based on something simple, yet full of meaning. If you've made it this far, I want to truly thank you for walking this story with me until the end. It's special to know that someone has stuck with me all this time, following every step of this journey. If this video resonated with you, please leave a like. It's a simple way to show that this message touched you and that it was worth it for us to be together this far. Subscribe to the channel to continue watching this type of content. Each new video is designed to bring stories that inspire, help us reflect, and remind us that there's always a way to start over. And if you read it all the way through, comment below, "I felt this message." I'd love to know who was with me in this conversation until the very last second. There's a video here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into this reflection. Click on it and stay with me there. I'm sure it will resonate with you right now.